materializing from within. Scholars often characterize the nation building in the 1990s as a delayed indigenous nationalism, trying to catch up with the post-war new state. However, this delay has to be carefully considered because over time the ideas of indigeneity and nationalities have dramatically changed. Dealing with the question of sovereignty in post-authoritarian Taiwan, my books will address state and civil society in Gramsci's terms. I argue that this dislocation of culture and history in a crisis of sovereignties made democratization in the 1990s and throughout the 20th century to be a passive revolution in which various political and social forces struggled for leadership, but none had achieved totalistic hegemonies. Used by Gramsci to interpret the transformation without a genuine challenge of social relations in the Italian revolutions, the concept of passive revolution demonstrates equilibrium of force in a particular conjuncture in which neither of these forces can dominate. This concept is useful in accounting for the process of democratization that introduced and set up a representative political system in the name of new nations. The formation of popular sovereignty within new constitutional framework in Taiwan in no time went into controversy on the social front. There were socially, morally minded voices from newly established world of social movements that challenged this liberal realization of civil liberties and political rights. The making of social movement waves in urban Taiwan, mostly in Taipei, presented social forces with a morally alternative democracy on its agendas. My book particularly examines how this social force effectiveness and accountability brought and its different parts were organized and coordinated so it could perform on a par with political and economic interests. My book addresses the organizing questions in terms of what many scholars have called a professionalization of social movements. Since the early 1990s, the world of activism in Taiwan has become much more complex than many activists had initially thought. Changes, for example, in the repertoire of actions, organizing strategies, mobilizing structures, and political process bring the practice of social movements to an unprecedented level of complexities, subtlety, and intensities. More and more people are involved in different forms of activism in the fashions that allows more sophisticated, coordinated, and crafted actions. Given this new technology of activism, social movement in the changing historic situation had played a major part, adapted and adapt to struggle of power and identities, thanks to a relaxed political system of representation and burgeoning discontent over its system's pitfalls, as I just mentioned in the last paragraph. For deepening the exploration of evolving civil society, my books also examine the history of political enthusiasm that has made possible the making of what I call a talking public. These pictures about the social mobilizations, the social mobilization and demonstrations in the 1990s. When the time when I was doing my PhD research, and the left one is. I don't know if there's an instance of the Bai Xiaoyan, the killing of a very famous celebrity's daughters, the kidnapping and the killings, and after that instance, different, a lot of social groups, they just organize themselves into a social force and stage 3 demonstration, very large demonstration, and in a time and in a row, 3 weeks in a row. So that's a big event in the 1990s. And the right one is labor movement mobilizations. As you may know, like the Chiodo, the 4 demonstration just was last week. Although it's kind of controversial at this years, but in the 90s, different forms of labor mobilizations very a lot of the men and on the stage. So there's just different pictures about these two is more like the street events, but behind the street event we see that those different meetings and kind of the seminar, something like we've been doing about to talk about what the mobilization for the movement is about. So it's like not just the streets, dynamism, the very visible one, but also the behind the door, there's different forms of people interacting with each other to talk about the issues. So it's in the sense the labor and the women's movements, meetings. And so like this part is about about the talking public. In Taiwan, as in elsewhere, democratization has brought about new ingredients into the meaning of citizenship and social life. These new ingredients have turned democracy into a way of life to which people have been invisibly drawn. So my book also addresses the new phenomenon in which free but compulsive political expression has been redefined in civil society. So like as you see in the pictures, in the 90s it's the new things that talking, the radio in the very beginning, and after that the TV catch up. They have different kind of talk shows about the very controversial political issues on the TV. I don't know for your generation it's kind of everyday things, but for my generations, when people begin to talk about politics on the TV, it's kind of very fresh, and revolutionary. In the 80s, you are not allowed to do that. Not to mention, in the 70s, you will be arrested for talking about public, in a very expressive way. So that in the 90s, we see that TV is doing that. That's the big things. And so like it argues that my book argues that by understanding this everyday eagerness to talk about politics could and would social movements be able to transform themselves into multi-purpose social forces capable of adjusting themselves to counteract problems coming out of the complexity and multiplicity of daily life. So I mean that in my chapters I'm talking about how the social groups try to deal with this very huge phenomenon, like people like eager to talk about politics, so that they create a connection between these talking politics and the more traditional social movements, organizations, social movements, networks. That kind of connection, how that kind of connection is made especially in the very beginning of the 21st centuries. Okay, then part 2 of my books addresses the identity and ethnic questions in Taiwan, and I think it's a kind of very explosive issues. The national politics in Taiwan has long lived and generated. The origin of national popular nativist movements had helped the formation of public sovereignties, as we see in the 90s, and actually it kind of began in the 80s. Some kind of national popular movements, but on the stage, and they have helped the formation of the social forces very capable of expressing themselves. So scholars have been debating whether these politics regarding the national futures have transformed itself into a state nationalism, and that served the interest of official state building. But in the 90s, this kind of populism is making the scholars anxious, because of it was connected with the state power. So that's in the beginning, the popular nationalist sentiments was being utilized by the political force. So it's caused some anxieties. And moreover, the increasing China influence has been dramatized these developments, as we see, all down to today's. This nationalist controversy brings me to watch identity politics closely in my book. 认同 the Mandarin translation of identity might have been the most explosive terminology in the post-martial times. Critical Geertz has once described primordial attachment in search of collective self as always accompanying the desire for an effective government among new states. Although this primordialism of ethnicity has been severely criticized, the mythology of nationalism after Benedict Anderson's everybody agrees, Anderson's book, the groundbreaking book, Imaging Community, remained a terrain of contestations. Anderson was actually personally involved in Taiwan nationalist debates. When I was just back from the States in 2000s, I remember that Anderson was, everyone talking Anderson, and he personally coming to Taiwan in the 90s, and he wanted to come again in the early 2000s, but there's some issues about, I think he kind of personal incident. He forgot to bring the passport to the airport, so he couldn't make the flight. So just end up using the video to present to the seminar. So I was in the seminar. So Anderson actually personally involved in Taiwan's politics. And since the early 1990s, scholars in academia have debated about Anderson's serialization of nationalism and its local appropriation in the middle of emerging politics of identity, political identities, aimed to end Kuomintang's political and cultural dominations. There's a different debates. Like Zhao Gang at Shanghai University has accused several heavyweight socialists to systematically misrepresent Anderson in the service of Taiwanese nationalist agendas. The accusation initiated an extended academic feud between socialists and cultural study people, so that we are the consequence. There's an academic war between sociology and cultural study. In the late 1990s in Taiwan, there's a huge debate about the nationalism. And so in 2004, as I just talked about, Anderson visited Taiwan and showed sympathy for Taiwan independence period, citing his Scottish experience. And despite uncertainty and ambivalence, this book argues that the politics of Bantu identity was a process of reconnecting people to cultures. That's my position. Resisting essentialism by exploring sense of relationship, the identity politics crisscross different forms of social struggles. This sense of connectivity also directs me to examine the meanings of well-being in post-martial Taiwan. Identity politics urge people to rethink not just who they are, but also what they are, especially criticism of democracy has brought different social issues to the foreground of political struggle after decades of anti-authoritarianism, largely in response to a changing economic and social condition in which existing safety networks has been washed away. Indeed, Taiwanese society was going through a dramatic economic and democratic transformation that made the implementation of universal safety net much more urgent than ever. So my books therefore provoked a debate regarding welfare and have implicated social movement organizations and see the welfare demand as a moral politics and it's a space overdetermined by a changing global economy, nationalism, and poverty, and politics of protest. So I try to promote the so-called identity politics, make it not just about the nations, it's also about what society is about, what kind of society you want to build in terms of equality and different kind of the social concerns. So I try to grow that concept and make it more like morally progressive, morally critical kind of in my book I try to make efforts to kind of build a bridge between the national politics and the more like progressive leftist concerns. All right. So and chapter 5 of my book actually investigates darker sides of democracy, addressing the new ethnic politics in which some pictures about the chapters talking about the creation of ethnicity as imagined alternatives moves democracy to the place of what Charles Taylor called the political recognitions. So chapter 5 of my books talk about the new, not just the big politics in the government agencies, but also the political recognitions and in everyday life. And my chapters document 2 ethnic struggles for recognition in Taiwan. One is about an Aboriginal Banzai tribes. It's also called Amis, Amis tribes. Whose tribalism has uncovered long buried case with exposure would be explosive disconcerting, and I actually joined a team working on historical exploration about the violence encountered between Han Chinese and the Aboriginal Banzai tribes in the Qing period, and we were working on make it public how that incident is about. Okay, so and the other case is about what I would like to call Hakka radicalisms, whose recent formation show the heterogeneity of the Han Chinese identities. Recognition in these chapters has shown that was a process of daily reinvented acknowledgement of the shadow tradition in the middle of unrecognizable cultural confrontations. And so the third issue of my book is about the localities. So to look at the local effect of democracies, my book also investigates a trend of press-based mobilization, a pervasive and continuing events for the care of press among urban neighborhoods. In the context of the post-martial Taiwan, this changing mode of mobilization about the complexity of life works has gained strength, as many people have come to believe that local needs and differences has been ignored and divested in the course of universalistic plans for modernization. Neighborhood mobilization in Taipei has had huge impact upon the broad social movement field since the mid-1990s. At first glance, these mobilizations were basically respond to both worsening urban and regional problems and the feeling of loss of control over time and space, representing self-help groupings around in a sense of communities. Communities were, in these cases, were reclaimed and remade in the course of those actions. My book examined an urban neighborhood called Ya-Chung in Taipei, and its residents have to bring the community together. And this is a map of the neighborhood and different pictures when I was doing my field work. The seniors, different people, interactions. That actually what my book is about the interactions, not just the big issues. We talk too much about the big issue, but kind of how people interact and how the feeling and consciousness was formed and reformed in the middle of those interactions. So I try to document my ethnography, my work. My purpose of my field work is to try to document these everyday actions, and for me that's kind of strength of ethnography. You can really look at the people, how the people, what people think and how people doing, about their daily life. So, and kind of in the very end of my books, for cultivating on long-term micro effects, as I say just now, of democracy in the Ya-Chung neighborhoods, my chapters examine the daily trivialities of emerging lifestyle, the defense of limited space. My chapter 3 I call it Talking Democracy, and in chapter 7, the title of chapter 7 is called like Working Democracy. I try to examine the daily a defense of living space by Taipei residents embarked in collective action of various kinds over the past decades has brought about the urge to explore, and this exploration evokes walking as a form of lifestyle. Walking, as the title has suggested, has an enunciative functions, and so like my chapter studied those daily knowledge exploration into space, which opened up both physiological and cognitive possibilities. So like when you walk around a space, a place, it's not just movements without any purpose. It's actually very very active and purposive actions. Not just physical but also cognitive exploration and created, open up new possibilities. And the conclusion of my books, actually conclude my book by returning to a national concern with the past of war and with the recent talks about peace across the straits. After the book was published in 2013, so it's still Ma Ying-jeou still president. So like it's about the peace, making efforts by the President Ma Ying-jeou after 2008. An appeal to cross-strait peace deeply rooted in the impending free trade framework has been President Ma Ying-jeou's major mainland policy concerns, which however has raised fierce public questioning. Actually this book was published before Sunflower movement, but my conclusion has been talking about is the cross-strait trade deals has very big significance for the Taiwanese democracy. And 8 years after my book's publication, so like you see the Sunflower movements, eruptions, so like kind of make my books at times like kind of visibilities. I got like some book reviews in the very important journals, so like the Journal of Asian Studies. I think thanks to the Sunflowers, so like people like kind of they found my books, I believe, and so they gave some good reviews. So I actually in this chapter I problematize the imagine of war and peace in conjunction with the discursive military and economic formation of the Chinese sovereignties. With this rising supremacy, four fronts have reached the interiors of Taiwan politics. The democratic matrix become the last line of defense and the only hope for peace. That's kind of the conclusion of my books. I'm talking about not just the eye for eye, war rhetorics, against the non-war rhetorics. I'm thinking about if we can have some democratic platform, to deal with this kind of these tensions, these war situations. So I'm talking about democratic, the multiplicity, so to speak. If that multiplicity can become our line of defense. It's kind of very idealistic, but for scholars, it's our privilege to be idealistic, to give another alternative role to peace, something like that. So that's the conclusion of my books. I don't know if I still have time to talk about my book projects now, maybe after.
Let's wait for students' questions, and then we can add.
So I will take questions
Yeah.
immediately, not after.
No. We are still will start from 11:30, so we still have half an hour for question and answer discussion. Okay, and before we take a short break. All right. Questions questions on the floor. Yeah, go ahead. No. Speak out louder.
Okay.
You curiosity.
And I want to ask how to maintain a sense of place in this fast changing inner city.
你想要多一点东西，刚刚问题听清楚了吗 ？Okay, more questions from the class or from our guests or from yeah, other questions over there.
Because when that is in the
When you speak, you can remove your mask, otherwise it's not clear. Yeah.
Because the changes of the conversation is a little bit fast and also having the changes within the search system and how the people inside like the models inside to face the changes like the outsider coming inside the area.
我觉得你可以再问问题，对这个问题，好像比较多一点机会给同学。有没有其他同学要问问题？那我要问问题喽。你再问，我问完我再问。用中文问吗？可以用中文问，同学们也可以用中文问。
我其实对社区营造比较有兴趣，然后我想说，因为很多社区营造是走向商业化，那一旦这个商业化，就是一旦没有利益的话，那这个商业化的社区它还能继续经营吗？
玉玲was saying that she's more concerned with the community building, but when this community building or so-called Chuang, creative industry, when it is turned into a commercialization, is there any more chance or utilized by these commercialized purposes? Other questions? Who are interested in this democratization and so on? Question? Yeah, go ahead.
Not really. Well, I think I can speak. Okay, sure. Morning. Hi. Hello. No, just a quick question maybe, because in Europe it's very, let's call it trendy. It's very common now to speak about spaces and have a look into urban spaces as polyvalent spaces. But there is one concept that I've been reading some of the articles, and there's one concept that it's not like I missed, but I was curious if you encountered it, and if can you find examples of this kind of spaces called this very trendy spaces, this no spaces of Mark or
this non-space.
Yeah, this non-spaces or even this focal heterotopias, if they have a role into these democratic processes, that would be. Okay.
他在问之后，我们就先回答，然后再开放。还是一样，口罩拿出来。
One question is about like we always see the community inside the urban is will born from the old area, like the old community from the urban. But how like when the urban is building and different new area district born, and how the highly developed urban, the new community built, and then do like the things in the old community, how they 的可能。
最后一个是说什么是 excluded？
就是譬如说到原生社群的时候，我会觉得这一种就是它的，就是好像很成功的，就是新的这种社区，然后可是进去以后就会觉得它有很强烈的排他性，在它的氛围里。
Thank you for these very wonderful questions. And it's kind of actually, my book project right now I'm been working since 2015. It's actually more about urban space. I bring the focus back to Hsinchu from Taipei. So I'm still working on after my first book, the last part of the book is about urban community, but I actually not really get into the concept of space, in my first books. So the book process I'm working now, I try to make it the concept more explicitly dealt with in the projects, and talk about the different different utopia kind of specialization in the new projects. So if we still have another chance to talk about the projects, maybe I can talk about more about that in that situation. But for now, it would be I think most of your questions focus on the sense of places and the sense of space in the place kind of, and people. In Yongkang, the first groups of people is more how the sense of place was formed in Yongkang, and how people deal with it, and in the middle of the social mobilizations is there any consequences after that changing sense of place being brought into light. I don't know if I correctly understand your questions, and that's also my my focus when I was working on my books in the very beginning of the 21st century. And as I say just now, that kind of sense of places was coming out of coming out of nowhere, out of blue. In the 80s, people don't really pay attention. In the 80s and throughout the very last part of the 90s, people not really paying attention to the press. When I was living in Taipei in the late 1980s, Taipei is kind of the garbage city, and we call it literally, when the 80s resident in Taipei, there's I don't know if you know the garbage mountain. Garbage mountain, what is ruins. There's a big news event in the late 90s. There's I don't know, the neighborhood in the very edge of the cities, and people just dump, the city government and people dump the garbage along the river bank, and one day, it can take no more the garbage, and because of the weather, so the garbage burn itself, it become that very public safety issues in the late 1980s. So at the time, even in Taipei, actually the Taipei in the 90s is so different from Taipei's after as far as I see that after mid 1990s, it become different kind of the cities, and that's the reasons I was why I going into this neighborhood and try to find out the answers to because I think the answers to this kind of difference would bring us some new ideas about democracy in Taiwan, the everyday, as I say just now, the everyday interaction, the everyday mobilizations, and I think that's the issues. There's different kind of government policy in the early 1990s about people talking about like every day, every international visitors coming to Taiwan, they talk about the garbage car, the music, the garbage vehicles, and the people bring the garbage out every evening. It become a huge social event, the daily social event, and that actually, the actual result of the government policy in the early 1990s, the so-called don't let garbage is underground, because before that all the garbage is people that bring garbage and dump it, any place around the city. So that's kind of I try to explore these ideas based on how this kind of the sense of place was made and remained constantly changing in the Taipei neighborhoods. And I don't know, I don't have the even from now I don't have definite answers to that emergence of the sense of place, but I see the changing trajectory, the changing course of that sense of place. It's people like in the very beginning, it's always like in Yongkang, it's kind of people that when I was just in the neighborhoods, people were talking about Asians, kind of urban Asians, as young college students, because that the community park was going to be demolished, because of the rural enlargement projects. So and that young college students come out and asking people to sign on the petitions, and they give the petition to the city government, and then there's in the 1995, if I remember correct, that people just people don't think that we have that many people coming out, to have the meetings with the government officials in 1995, like 1,000 people, they show up and meet with they invited the government, the city government officials to come to the neighborhoods to talk about, if that park can be preserved, so that the officials promised to come, and 1,000 people show up without, only young college students, she petitioned against the demolitions. So when I was there, people talking about that kind of agents, and they see it at the beginning of the community consciousness. So I try to, so I try to in my books, I try to understand this kind of, little things. There's different little things, one after another, in the course of the mobilizations, and in late 1990s, and we have some say community rebuilding projects. Government, I think the government catch up that kind of momentums, and they create policies, to come to terms with it. That's for my understanding. It's kind of reverse. People always think that in 1994 the government have the, some kind of community projects, so the different community coming out, and because of that project. Okay, that's actually that in the 1990s commercialization was not an issue. Actually, that times people are very, I don't know, they think the community stuff it's about self-organizing. There's no commercialization way involved. I think that's actually the government. As I said, the government policies followed suit after people's momentum, and the big companies did that too. So that they know that there's a big things there that people, because I don't know if because of this fight of democracies, the momentums, there's some kind of in my book I say qi. I use the name qi. There's some kind of insight, the effect. If in the past decades, I find the new concept, the effects, the qi, the effects, a kind of thing inside the people, in the collectivities, so that they coming in. So that become problems, of course. But in my book, there's always some social force, social consciousness against commercialization, and I think that my books address it. I don't think that there's only one voice, only one force in the society. There's different kind of forces, and these different forces compete against each other. So that the commercialization and the socialization, if we can say that, the socialization of the neighborhood, mobilization, the different forces. In my chapter, I actually want to show to my readers how these two forces, like they can sometimes they get wrong with each other. And not every kind of commercialization is bad. There's a small business, they actually doing good things about the community. But we see also chain stores, they are, kind of driving up the rents so that the residents, the renting residents, they cannot stay. There's that kind of economic issues involved. So my book, I'm not saying there's only one answer to this commercialization, the problems, but you have to pay attention to how people deal with it. And if you read my book, you see the very small details about the competitions among these different kinds of forces.
We should open up for a second round of questions and answers. Here's my question first, and then you can follow up here briefly. I think it's very interesting that you brought up this concept of talking democracy, talking in public. Right after this lifting of the martial law, this lifting of this the ban, all sorts of ban, when people start to confront the taboo and try to engage with social injustice. But this talking in public, it seems that the force is liberated from all sides. Of course, we have this free space for journalists, media, and also newspapers and so on. But now, whatever we saw in this 90s became today this very fragmented but also privatized talking show, right, by different parties or different commercial supported groups. So each station speaks of their own ideological position, right? So in the name of freedom of speech, right? So, but they also reinforce some essentialist positions or political essentialist positions. So what do you think this will lead up to? Where is a public space, public forum that people can really communicate and not to be hijacked by this very privatized notion? The second question, walking democracy, also very important, going deep into this locality and following up this community building, okay, and encouraging people to be more self-conscious of their living space and try to bridge and link up connectivity. But will that lead to more and more inward looking? That is when you discuss about this possibility of peace, okay, or democratic multiplicity. How do we build up this democratic space, not only locally, very, very narrowly focused, okay, inward looking democratic space that's to defend for ourselves. But is there any possibility of a translocal democratization or translocal self-help, translocal self-support, or mutual support? Okay, would that be in your perspective, because you are still working on Xinchu? Okay, two questions. But before you answer, other questions from our students? I think back to your own society. Okay, are there other issues you want to take this opportunity to discuss? Maybe if there's no more questions, then okay.
I think these two questions are all very important. Actually, they're all like the major issue I try to address in my books about the token democracy. It's about I think your question is about this idea is that people talk to each other about everything, the good things, but we see that there's a manipulation and controlling and essentialization.
Actually, it's not only on the TV show,
but also on the daily.
But also social media platform.
Sure, and even in the daily settings, like we make it. Actually, my chapter not just talk about talk shows, but I also talk about the daily talk shows, so to speak, in the 90s and the early 2000 people, we sit down as friends.
But there are a lot of forums, social issues,
Right.
For example, at the tea house,
Right.
Almost weekly.
That's kind of the famous restaurants, particularly about the democracy talking debates, but also in your living room, in your classrooms, people will talk to each other about politics. That's not the taboo in Taiwan actually. So there's this kind of the TV talk shows and on a particular spot talking to each other, and the daily settings in the living rooms. On the if you go out eat your lunch, you watch the news TV, and maybe you just talk to your friends there about the political issues, that kind of thing. We see the dangers, of course, and actually in the 90s, throughout the throughout the years before the book published, actually the scholars and the observers, critics, they kind of anxious about that, not just the more liberal minded, but also the Dept scholars, they think about the populist tendencies, in these talkings, the people that get involved and get very enthusiastic, and so that the opinions become so opposing, something like that just like we have seen in the States and in Taiwan. It was happening also, become so opposing to each other. But as I always do in my books, I want to see the positive side. I see this kind of project. We see the dangers, of course. I see the dangers, but also I see there's some good things. Actually, that public, people can jump in without any restriction, and it kind of implicates, you always have something to say to each others, and so even there's a dangers of people opposing, but there's still, we see that some opinions are more like bridging each other. We see the different kind of the tendencies. So I try to, there's people's, anxious about the dangers, and then they will jump in and talk to each other in different ways, so that made the conversations for me like more open-ended kind of. And one thing, at least for the, in my chapters, I was saying that one thing we can learn from this talk show is, the enthusiasm, because when in the classroom, when professors talking about issues, it's kind of students are, not paying attention, they were sleeping, something like that. But we see in these talk shows. So I was saying in a chapter we can learned from these talk shows about how to involve people, and so the people get get involved and become enthusiastic. And I think that's the good thing, good part of the the public life. The public life is not just about reasoning. It's also about you feel like something's toward each other. So that affects side of the public life. So I think that kind of talking power teaching me about this too, how we can combine these two sides, reasoning and something like enthusiasm about talking, that kind of combinations. And actually the same about the in working sense of place. So we see that kind of danger, that kind of tendency, train the people when people more like paying more attention to the local issues, they tend to forget the issues. It's not just local, it's always some kind of connection, from our side. Even in the very beginning, you can see the connections. So like, and I actually borrowed the concept from there's a critical geographer named Dolan Massey. There's a debate between David Harvey and Dolan Massey about about the sense of city. You come back to your questions that non-presence and this kind of they are talking about if we can kind of socialist minded progressively minded scholars, they can if they have to support press based on globalization or not, that kind of debate more like the 19th century, the communist international debates about the nationalists and between like Lenin and Marxist, between Lenin and so like that the Harvey and the message debating about that kind of sense of process, and I was more like using Dolan Massey's concept. She proposed like there's a for Harvey like the sense of place is more like the it's kind of not progressive but reactionary, but regressive. It always come back to the inside. But for Massey, she sees there's a progressive side of the sense of places. So she called it the progressive sense of place. And in my case, you can if you try to deal with the local problem like traffic, like the traffic jam all the time, and the garbage, the dirty gentrification of the neighborhood. You try to beautify it, and you try to clean it up, and without the kind of the inclusive consciousness involved. And you would know, like when you're dealing with that was questions, like the reasons and the cause of it's not just local. You see that there's a translocal connection, but not just the translocal in the sense of the big things and people like going to some kind of alliances to talk about the transnational translocal issues. But in your local questions you see the translocalities, like in talking the non-press is something like that. And kind of dystopia, but also utopia. When you go into that space, it's kind of nowhere, but it's also bring you to somewheres like the airports, the train stations, that kind of space. And park, if you go to the park, you see that kind of double feelings. It's really transpress to be seated and then rest. But the park is inviting different people coming in from the outside. When I was doing my field, I literally stay in the park for the whole afternoon, and I see different, there's different events, people get into it, and you would know, the park in the afternoon is so heterogeneous. You see the visitors, tourists, mother with kids, and middle class, office ladies, and the young men, they come to lunch there. And so in those places we see the connections between different possibility of the city stuff. So it became, I not just scholars, but for residents also, they began to think about the questions for them, not just cannot be resolved from within, but also has to be reconsidered from without and from the outside effects. So that's how I deal with this kind of, of course, you're right, it's always in your bookings in the very beginning, but the resolutions of it has to be open-ended, have to be, have to open up, and so it can bring into different considerations, then the question becomes very translocal, and the city-wide alliance can be built. In my case, the different neighborhoods, when they understand the kind of some kind of contradiction, then they automatically talking to each other and build up alliances against the city government, some kind of net policy, something like that. So that's different. That's how we say about from bottom to up, that kind of things. And from bottom to up, you see that also from press to translocal. And actually the same things. The press is always implicates, the movement. People move, so the press become trans-press. Always, it's kind of double faces of the sense of place.
Very good. Thank you so much. So I think it should be time for us to take a break. Well, we should take a break, and the next session can start from 11:40. We'll take a 15 minutes break. All right. Okay. If you have other questions, you can come up here to discuss with Professor Chuang, or you can write up your reflections on your journals. All right. Yeah. Okay. Let's thank Ya-Chung老师.
Okay, so hi everyone, my name is Jason Chen, and I'm from National Yang University, and let's move to the section 2. The topic is from media crisis to intellectual crisis, a reflection on the media disorder, media reform movement, and the communication studies in Taiwan. So for the lecturer, his name is Li Wei, and he is not only a professor but also the chairman in Department of Communication and Technology. And his experience, he has the experience of being the political economist of, he has been the columnist brand magazine in Taiwan and also the journalist in Taiwan Daily. And his expertise are political economics of communication, globalization and international communication, critical theories and popular culture studies, and media policy. So today he is going to talk about where the media crisis happened in Taiwan. So now let's welcome Professor Li Wei.
Professor looks a little bit nervous. When you introduce your guest speaker, you should look at him and smile at him, and don't just stare at your computer. Okay, but this is a practice. Everyone will need to learn how to chair a session and introduce a speaker. So, okay, go ahead.
Thank you. Very good introduction. Maybe too good. Yes, I'm T. Wei. Wei Bi in Chinese name. I'm very grateful to Joyce, Professor Liu, to let me have this opportunity to share my thoughts and some experiences in my academic profession and maybe social participations. Joyce told me that this is a not so formal situation, so I was convinced by this. So, but Ya-Chung's talk just made me a little bit nervous because I think I'm not so organized to prepare this talk. I just want to share some personal experiences and some thoughts on these related issues. First of all, let me introduce myself more because I think this would be related to what I'm going to talk. My first degree is in mechanical engineering. Later, I changed my direction to journalism in my master degree. After the graduation and 1 year working experience in newspaper, I went to Britain to pursue my PhD degree in Media and Communication Studies in the Department of Social Sciences in Loughborough University in central England. I came back to Taiwan to teach and do research in 2003. First in Tankong University and transferred to Ya-Chung University in 2008. I participated in some social movements since I was a college student and particularly involved in media reform movements after I entered the communication profession field in the 1990s. So the following talk will begin with the early experiences of participating in media reform movements, and I will give some examples to review how do I think of the media reform movements and communication studies in Taiwan. Yeah. Before that, let me start with this recent example. Maybe some of you already heard or know about it. The case of CTI News. Our NCC, National Communications Commission, rejected the license renewal application of CTI News, 中天新闻台。Very few people know what's in English. It's okay. CTI News belongs to the Wang Group, Wang China Times Group. Wang is a large food company, local large food company. This case raised many controversial and important issues in Taiwan, include, for example, like freedom of speech or freedom of press, or what is the appropriate regulation measures of media governance. But for me, it's not a very simple yes or no question. For the NCC, they provide many advances that because the channel violated the regulations frequently in the past 6 years since its last renewal, and many people accused or provide many advances to the NCC that the channel is not an appropriate news channel or a news media. But for me, it does have some very loyal supporters and audience. They need it. They need this news information, no matter what is the content or how bad is the content it provides. So it has some social significance. But if we ignore this social significance, just see how many violations or maybe we say contraventions it has made, we will lose some very important facts and issues that we should explore more. So I will trace back this issue to 1990s, and maybe we can have a more proper understanding in this issue and this topic. As you may have already known that media reform movements were a part of the entire democratization and liberalization movements in the 1980s in Taiwan. Along with the transformation of authoritarian party state in 1980s, the lift of press ban, 报禁, ban on publications of newspapers, was lifted in 1988. This lift symbolized a great leap of the media reform movement, but I think it was just a beginning. After about a couple of years, in the 1990s, the reform movements of the media divided into two tracks. The first was inherited from the legacy of anti-party state movement. It continued to push a deregulation approach of the media. So they want the power or the influence of the state totally exit from the media. So the central appeal of the movement was to force the party, the state, and the military force to retreat from the media. In Chinese, 党政军退出媒体. 党政军退出媒体. It was also called three retreats, 三退, 党政军, 三退运动. The three retreat movement became the dominant media reform movement, and it was also the dominant discourse of media reform at that time. It did have very popular support from the society. The reason was quite obvious, because the appeal is to fight against KMT, party state, KMT regime. This appeal could be always effective to mobilize people, even by now. I will come back to this later. So this is the first track, which I was not in. Okay, I was in the second track. The second track was skeptical to the first, and argued that a deregulation approach without any social check and balance would lead to completely market-driven media. The media escaped from the party state, but fell into another evil force, the capitalist. So some media reform activists turned and created the other track, or the alternative solution for reforming the media. They call it the publicization of the media, 媒体公共化. So they believe that this approach will truly transfer the control and ownership of the media from the party state to the society, to the public, to the citizens, rather than to the capitalists. But unfortunately, either tracks seem to fail to some extent in the 1990s. For the first track, although the party state powers did gradually retreat from the media, the capitalists also came in to take over very quickly. Several large corporations dominated the media industry, and profit-oriented policy logic led to a significant downfall of the quality of media service, particularly the news. The situation was just getting worse, and the so-called media disorder, 媒体乱象, was generally recognized in the late 1990s. So for the second track, because of the appeal was not so easy to understand. I mean, the publicization of the media, which is not so easy to understand by the public. So, and did not get full support. Also did not get full support from the government, because the government was not very happy to see a strong public media. There would be a threat to their legitimacy. So since then, the goal of the publicization movement was very limited achieved. We do have a public television established in 1998. Yes, we have a public television system. But the system was very, and it still is very weak and small in comparison with the private sectors. Let alone in comparison with the public media systems in some democratic countries like Britain, Japan, and even our neighborhood, South Korea. So therefore, the public media in Taiwan has not yet made a substantial impact on the entire media environment. So after all, the media environment in general remained to be chaotic in the first decade of the 21st century. So the disappointment and anxiety spread widely. No matter what you believe in the right way to reform the media, and the common desire was to find an outlet to break through the stagnant situation. The whole movement was stuck in some way. At this moment, Tsai Ing-wen, the chairman of the Wang-Zhong group, at that time the Wang group, came out onto the stage. The group expanded their media business territory within 3 years. They merged, acquired the China Times, which was I think one of the most important newspapers in Taiwan, and later they entered into the industry, the cable television industry, and the terrestrial TV industry as well. This guy, he expressed very frankly that he has no respect for journalism. His business philosophy is apparently profit-oriented. His media violated some very basic journalist ethics frequently, and even his personality, even his look. You can Google his picture. Just look at rude, and some people will think he's uncivilized, something like that. All in all, just let many people think that he is a perfect an enemy of media reform movement. So suddenly, the media reform movement had a new momentum because the enemy is too perfect. Fight against. In 2012, in June of 2012, Ya-Chung attempted to acquire one of the largest cable system in Taiwan, Zhongjiao City. If it succeeds, the Ya-Chung Group will become the largest media company in Taiwan, media power in Taiwan. So that raised the very high social concerns on this. So this is why we can see the anti-media monopoly movement raising in 2012, in August of 2012. In my view, the two tracks of the media reform movement merged together at this moment, in this movement. Because, first, I have already told that the enemy is very perfect. The second, it gave the new momentum for the media reform movement. Third, because we transfer the enemy from the state to the capitalist. So this fits in the explanation of the second track, because we think the new threat to the media is capitalist rather than the state. So it fulfills all these predictions and thoughts. So we think, oh, that's good. We just get some new momentum to maybe like recovery of the media reform movements. But actually, I would think this kind of situation and the position is actually a copy of the track one from the 1980s and 1990s, because the logic of the anti-something is the same. Okay, we just from anti-party state to anti-capitalist, but we didn't imagine, or we didn't give an alternative of how we going to build a new media system, a better media system, after we successfully fight against the party state, either party state or the capitalist. Another not so obvious factor behind this merge of two tracks is that the two enemies were both we should say, from the blue camp. In Taiwan, is pro-unification with China, the position. So they have a commonness in this. So I would say this is not the ideal or the better approach for media reform. Actually, it's just embedded in the current very complicated political situation of Taiwan. So I started to move a little bit away from the movement for myself. I just try to re-examine the history of this process and see what we maybe may lose, or we just didn't see what the real fact is behind these historical processes. So I started research and wrote a paper about examining the discourse of media disorder. In the paper, I think the consensus is actually a product of social constructed discourse. I used CDA method, which is critical discourse analysis to deconstruct the discourse of media disorder. And I found that the discourse was constructed through a pair of classes, which is called the ideal media, which was directly transplanted to Taiwan from the West. I think this transplantation is bad, or it caused some bad influence in media studies, also in media reform movements, because we didn't see, we just assumed the ideal media philosophy or principles from the West should and would be suitable for Taiwan. And based on that, so we assume an ideal standards. So when we see Taiwan's media situation, we support that because it is out of the order. So the order which is actually built and transplanted from the West. It's very easy for us to say, we have some problems in our media, but the problem is just based on the opposition or the opposite of the ideal principles. So I think two complementary or alternative approaches should be introduced to reconstruct the study. The first is a re-examination of the origin of the media disorder. And the second is a study of the media audience, particularly the ordinary and non-elite people. Let me give you an example. When I participated in the media reform movement, we used to have some public seminars or conference to advocate our ideas. And one day in the seminar, when I talked about the media disorder and how we should face it and how we should fix it, an audience, I think he is just a normal person from maybe like middle class or 上班族, and he just asked me that, Professor, you just talked about media disorder. Seems like it is a true thing, but for me, I didn't see any disorder in the media area. And he watched the cable TV news times. OK， 那我跳到下一页，因为它现在如果你按下一页，它就跑出来。OK。So the term, the media disorder has been created and increasingly used, widely spread since the late 1990s. To explain the origin of this disorder, many commentators and researchers argue that it was mainly a consequence of neoliberalism or market-driven journalism. However, a simplistic application of the explanation framework of neoliberalism onto Taiwan society and Taiwanese media may cause some blind spots that hinders appropriate understanding of the transformation and the real problems of Taiwanese media in the past 3 decades, and therefore the way to reform it. I think I will skip this. I think it is a naive version of liberalism. So, no doubt Taiwan has been strongly influenced by the U.S. in every aspect in the Cold War structure since the KMT took over the island in 1949. But it is certainly different from the Latin American countries. After the lift of the martial law in 1987 and the lift of the price ban in 1988, I just mentioned, liberalization and marketization have been the central idea of economic policy implemented by the ruling KMT government. However, thanks to the long-term accumulation of political, social, and financial powers due to following the developmental state model, the KMT was still able to deal with the liberalist ideology and did not completely follow it. At the 1980s and early 1990s. So we have some agendas to emphasize here. In Taiwan, the publication and circulation of newspaper were strictly controlled by the government for nearly 40 years. Once the ban was lifted, it was lifted completely. As the director of GIO, the Government Information Office, the Authority of Media Affairs at the time said, just quote this, about the lift of ban on press. I would like to confess that at that time, no one from the party, the government, and even the military gave me any one single instruction. I felt gratified because because there were no restrictions, and under the table exchanges. After the consultancies from with some senior newspaper industry and key scholars in communications, I made my career. I made my decision at totally opening. I had only one thought in my mind: open everything. Okay. So this is a very clear attitude to how they thought about the media governance. Just open everything. This is the first we should note. The agenda 2 is the legalization of cable television in 1993. The cable TV service grew rapidly in the 1980s and was illegal until the early 1990s. The US government was concerned very much about the unauthorized contents played by the cable TV service at that time. So it forced the Taiwan government to legalize the service and to regulate the industry more. The process of the legalization of cable TV again was the process of negotiations and struggles between the local state, the foreign state, the US, the local capitalists, and the international capitalists. One of the leading scholars in media studies in Taiwan argues that the so-called media disorder and the problem of the bad journalism are only superficial. The roots are the commercial and political characters of Taiwanese media, formed by the authoritarian regime and the influence of neoliberalist economy and the consumerist politics, wasn't a distorted relationship between the state and the media, and all that together produced an even more distorted and alienated free press. Indeed, the transformations of Taiwan's media in the 1980s and 1990s were very neoliberalist. Most of the media were under the processes of deregulation, liberalization, and marketization. However, the context and the path were very different. Firstly, it was not a transformation started from Keynesian welfare state to a neoliberal state like the path of the Western countries. Secondly, and more importantly, the democracy was premature, and the media was supposed to be the third realm between the state and the people, just to try to find out how to fit into the new role in the process of democratization. So Taiwanese media might find themselves in an awkward situation. On the one hand, they were not like the public media in the Western societies, so they were not experiencing a real privatization. On the other hand, they were not like the real commercial media too, because they have never really lived in a democratic market without the purposeful protection from the state. So for Taiwan's news media, they have not even really survived in the market of a democratic society, and had very little knowledge in how to operate and run the news media in such a market. The criticism, the criticism about neoliberalism may have only obscured the facts and not being able to grasp the center of the problem. Blaming the media as over marketization and profit orientation was actually blaming one thing they have not yet done so well that the other thing that they have already done for decades. The real problem would be Taiwan news media never had a chance to learn and practice how to establish an organic relationship with the society and the people. Okay, another research example is about the cable television I just mentioned. The title is The Vicious Cable Television, How It Raised. The cable television was and is widely recognized as the main cause of Taiwanese media disorder, particularly the news channels. So we have already seen. Before the the first decades of the 21st century, the cable TV was still the most dominant media outlet in Taiwan, of which the household coverage rate is over 80%. It is only decreased from since 2018. So one dominant explanation of its prosperity and popularity is that it provides what the audience did not receive from the state party-owned TVs at the time. That explanation assumed that the audience did know exactly what they want and need, and the rise of the cable television was requested by the mass audience. I questioned this explanation, and I did some audience interviews to let them recall the process, how they first time to watch cable TV, and why they started to subscribe cable TV service in the 1990s. I think most of your parents may have already experienced that process. The audience interviews helped to make some more complicated and appropriate explanations of the rise of the cable TV in Taiwan. First, contradictory state policies and unfriendly mainstream discourse together established the early stage of the development of the cable television. I say contradictory state policies about sometimes the state just ban the cable television. Sometimes they just let it go. They change it all the time. So the inconsistent policy on cable television made the industry involved into medium and small sized companies, because the whole environment is very inconsistent and very unstable. So they cannot evolve or they cannot develop into a large company. So most of the cable television companies in Taiwan are very small and medium sized. That's very important, and that is divisive to how they developed after that. So this is a small and medium-sized enterprise model, and the corresponding operational practices which were sustained after the legislation of the cable television period. Because they are very small and medium-sized, they try to earn the money quickly, as quick as possible. So they just provide some very cheap contents, and most of them imported from overseas. They didn't invest much in produce their own content. Otherwise, unless the government requested. So at this situation, the whole industry can just only provide very cheap and low quality contents to the audience. But to the first explanation, some scholars will say that is because our audience need all those bad contents. They like to see those bad news and repeatedly broadcast films over and over again. But I don't think that is an appropriate explanation, because in my interviews, most of the audience say that they didn't expect what kind of content the cable television should provide to them, to offer. They just subscribe it because everybody subscribed it. And it was very cheap to watch, to receive cable television signals. Some of them even have the cable television signals free. So at that time, the general audience had no concrete and strong needs, nor imagination for alternative televised services, but their consumption habits were gradually shaped by the industry, by the service provided by the so-called fourth channel, or called 第四台. That is early cable television in Taiwan. Along with the state and the industry, it then helped stabilize the later characteristics of Taiwanese cable television service since then. Okay. So I am still working on other researches to try to clarify and to re-examine the history of the changes and transformation of Taiwan media, and find some new explanations of this. My objective is to find some new arguments and explanation frameworks to both, firstly, to break through the stock of the media reform movements. I try to find some ways to revitalize it The other objective is also to bring some new insights into the communication and media studies in Taiwan, because we are very strongly influenced by the framework from the West, which have already given us some blind spots in the whole communication studies and researches the whole community. So I'm working on it, and I just it's just the beginning, and I just share my experiences and thoughts very briefly, but very roughly with you. Any questions and comments, welcome.
Thank you so much. Questions from the floor? Yeah.
Okay, so thank you for your personal experience and information. So my question is, to deal with the media disclosure in Taiwan, did the regulation that Thai government has implemented so far have effectively suppressed the media, or it just helped it expand more?
Sorry, okay. Let's slowly.
Okay. So my question is, do you think that Taiwan's government, the regulation they have implemented so far, has suppressed the media, or it just helped it to just expand more?
Do you want to correct the
Oh, yeah,
question?
okay.
Maybe you can
Yes.
respond together.
Yes.
All right, other questions? The situation in Hong Kong or Thailand or Vietnam? When we talk about media, we are talking about the way people might be able to communicate through some public channels, like media, journalists, media, or social media, or television platform could be one way for people to participate in the public space. But if there are what are the questions we need to consider? The case of this recently rejected application by this Yongtian station, is it a setback of this media freedom, or is it a regulation or monitoring of this maybe false renders positions or news reports and so on? But do we need to consider ordinary people's need for this type of narratives? So where is the justification of the media reform? I think those are the main questions brought up by Professor Wei. Actually, further question we need to consider, but I'm not going to read the question, I'll wait till later. But other question? The situation, yeah, right, and also from Indonesia or, no, go ahead, you use the microphone, yeah.
I think I'm asking for elaboration. Because you paused a video, a slide where you showed us a piece of news, and since you are still contemplating your research, and I'm curious about you showed us the video and also the characteristic of the Taiwanese news media, and I'm from Hong Kong, and I wasn't so sure if I caught your idea, like you showed us the video and then you moved on to the rest of the presentation. Was there something about the video? Because to me, I think it's like watching melodrama when I watch Taiwanese news. And when I watch 就是好像看电影嘛 but it's like but at the same time it's like film and television and information all in one, and it's very interesting. If I dare not say to look at it from a film theory perspective, but I think it could help because it makes us, it's like I think, because I don't have a TV at home, so the only chance I get to watch Taiwanese news is from YouTube and possibly from the television in the restaurants. And I think having a television at home to watch these news is almost like watching soap opera and dramas. I don't have that connection, but because in Hong Kong I don't get to see that kind of style of news. So I'm interested, could you care to elaborate? Is there a reason or significance to that example? And is there some correlation with how Taiwanese films? Is there any, or am I over-interpreting? Yeah.
You want to take another question?
Maybe later, yeah.
Maybe.
Thank you. First question. I said that the deregulation is the main, the key philosophy of media governance after 1990s in Taiwan. But that this is really need some more elaborations because there are two main kinds of regulations on the media. One is to the structure. The other one is to the content. The NCC made a lot of deregulation policies in the structural aspect, but they spend a lot of effort in content regulation. This is also the main reason why they reject the CTI news channel this time. This policy, I don't really, I was not very convinced by this policy because they deregulate the whole structure, the media environment at first time. So that is why the people like Taiwan can enter into this market. If we have some proper regulations in the media structure and how and about the ownership in advance, we could prevent some people like him. I didn't say, I'm not saying he's a evil or bad guy. I think he's a very capable businessman, and he has no any ideas in ideal media or good media, what good media is. If we have some very proper regulations on the media structure, at the first time he will think this industry will not welcome me, will not welcome a person like me. They only welcome the person who have some really good ideas in media operations and social responsibilities like that. So once you deregulate all these rules to run or to establish media, then you can't blame what kind of person come out to run the media. So the only tool they have left is the content regulation. The content regulation is very easy understand by the people. But content regulation is a very dangerous tool in media governance because it really have some influence in freedom of speech and freedom of press. So I would think this is a very contradictory way of the media governance in Taiwan. That's it. I don't know. I'm already. Maybe you can ask more later. And to the second, yes, our news channel and the content in our news channel, cable TV, particularly cable TV news channels, are very sensational. And yes, as you said, it's much more like melodrama or sometimes comedy than like news. But for me, I believe that this argument, since I was young and I was a college student, and it lasts for about 20, maybe 30 years. But after I have done some audience interviews, they give some very different inspirations in this. Imagine this. If you sit in your living room, you turn on the TV, you turn on the news channels, you watch all that news that the scholars and the elites say that is crap news. But I feel happy and I feel satisfied with that because I'm not watching news as you define. I'm watching drama. Why not? Because they can satisfy. They can be satisfied by this. They don't have. Some of them they don't watch or they don't see real TV drama all the time, but they watch TV news much more. But if they with all this content did make them happy, why should we ban this? Why should we ban these activities, watching viewing activities? All we need to explain is why they feel this is a right way to consume the TV contents. Why did they choose other way to watch or to be happy to consume all these contents? And why and how can we do by this situation rather than just blame on these contents and the viewers who watch them frequently? So this is what I'm thinking. It's a very difficult question for me and a very difficult task for the media reformers. Yeah. Okay.
It's very debatable. But other questions? Yeah. Okay. All right. First and second. Who else? Yeah. And third. Okay. Yeah. All right. Good. So whether we should defend 中天 CTI because so many people love this station, or whether we should check maybe the falsity or this very sensational ways of delivering the news, or they do not differentiate the news from drama, whether the audience actually should choose the drama session instead of watching the news, and they might easily believe or easily mobilized, not only by those very sensational stories, but also by all different kinds of news that would lead them to believe in anti-abortion, xenophobic sentiments or nationalistic sentiments and so on. So if you reverse it, okay, you take the public, their like and dislike, whether we are really sacrificing the public space by this privatized position, manipulated by the consumer's taste, and also by this profit-making media maker. Right? So the society might be very fragmented because of all the. Look at the Trump phenomenon. People believing the stations they are following, and still now they are still. But this is a question that we need to discuss later. So,
I actually just wanted to mention the Trump phenomenon. I was about to mention it. So what happens when we, I don't know if this is working or not working. So what happens when we just, well, what's wrong with me enjoying news? Well, Trumps get elected, right? That would be the good answer to it. But on the other hand, okay, so can we just, so we can't enjoy popular culture anymore, which news are part of it, because news are popular cultures in the end. Oh, even in this, so first in this extreme case of Taiwanese news that are so similar to maybe soap opera or to drama, but news in general, every single news that we turn on the TV, doesn't matter if they are Taiwanese or not, they are popular culture in the end. They are something that we consume every day in every country. We consume it, we watch it constantly. So this question about a popular culture and how does it work, it's the eternal question, right? If we should just consume it because we like it. This really popular term of guilty pleasure, right? But on the other hand, there is one thing that we've been talking some weeks ago with in the class, and it was about how oligarchies, how really powerful economically people take control, take power through this media. But on the other hand, how can we counteract it? And my question it would be aimed at media reformation and its relation to education. Educating a population in order to be able to select through the media, to be conscious about fake news or reliable news inside this whole big concept, which is news, which are in the end a very complex phenomenon, a very popular culture phenomenon. That would be my question.
The second question, maybe just you and him. Yeah, you first, and then pass it on to him. Push up.
I think Professor just mentioned that the regulation are in two ways. One is of structure and one is of the content. And I'm wondering that NCC as a so-called independent authority, that we have that regulation in Taiwan, like Guangdianfa in Taiwan. I think that regulate that if the press attacks someone that without fact check, that person can NCC can order that person to have the opportunity to say something on the same television channel. But I think that never happened in Taiwan, and I'm wondering that we have that regulation tool, but NCC never used this of the tool. I'm wondering what is the dilemma of NCC. And the second question is that Zhongtian channel, this time NCC reject the channel, but I think in the past that Zhongtian really made many of the fake news, but I think other TV channels are doing the same thing. But I think that I know in Taiwan, NCC is relying on the people that tell NCC that they are making fake news, so you have to punish them, and so that they make the punishment. But are there any positive way that NCC can do? I think the same way to like on to governing, to govern other TV channel. Are there any way, or we can just wait for next time, like Mingshi or next TV channel are also asking NCC that whether I can go on making news or not. Yeah, these are my two questions.
Sorry, I will ask my question in Chinese. 就是第一个就是我想顺着老师的那个对于就是媒体乱象这种一直在接下来的这种台湾媒体形态的一个历史的爬梳，然后接下来想问就是，因为近几年的自媒体的发展，开始提供了更多的平台或者管道，让更多的人可以自己创造自己的媒体，然后再吸引了更多的乐听观众，然后一方面似乎改变了现在台湾的一个媒体产制的一个形态，也大大改变了就是我们现在乐听众的一些乐听的方式或是乐听的内容。然后就是想问一下，就是这样的近几年的自媒体的发展，老师你就是老师你觉得如何回应到就是您提到的那个媒体乱象的这个脉络？然后就接下来就是因为另外一个问题是我想问，就是因为越来越多的越来越多的消息，就是我想就是导向就是另外一个就是关于假新闻的这个议题。对，就是这样假新闻的议题在近几年，是不是可以变成另外一种媒体乱象，或是对。
Can I pose another question?
Yeah, okay, go ahead.
Yeah. I'm interested about this regulating the media, but then I think we are moving forward right now. I think getting less people watching TV news or TV cable. We just interested to watch YouTube or other platform, right? So, my question is about: is there any policy possibilities to regulate this news production in social media? Like the case in maybe I could say the case in Indonesian. A lot of news make a bombastic title to attract clickbait. So sometimes they produce the same news for different titles, so they can earn click, or they can get advertisement. So another problem that I saw is like news citing other news. Like there is a news, but the source of the news is cited from the other news. And like in Indonesia, the experience I had in Indonesia is a lot of news sources or news companies, sometimes they only based in the country level or in district level, and it's not that reliable. The way they produce the news is only the habit of typing something or writing something. So my question is there any possibilities to regulate the content and the structure of the social media? Maybe in the future, like as you say, the media in the 80s or 90s in Taiwan was illegal, right? And then the government tried to regulate it, the content structure. But how about the social media? Yeah.
Any more questions? There might be last. Yeah, okay, go ahead. I think this is so important. Some people want to ask more.
Just following the question, I agree that most people, the young people now, preferred watching like the YouTube or the resources online, but indeed the people who go to vote, like when we go from the culture industry go to go volunteer, and people who go to vote is most of them are still watching cable TV, but nowadays who is working or the cultural, the people from cultural field, they are all like debating the new media and also the new platform online. But so I think there is a gap that maybe the things that the things happen in the cable TV is still going on, and the audience is still absorbing the entries from the cable TV, but on the other side, the people who are working or more passionate on how to develop or reform the media, they go to the online platform. So how do we treat with this gap?
Okay, Vienna.
I have a question. We talk a lot about TV cable, so I'm curious about other kind of media like newspaper and radio. Are there any China newspaper in Taiwan now, and whether or not they were censored or banned by Taiwanese government? And that question also leads me to curious about misinformation, about fake news now. How Taiwanese government manage fake news, manage misinformation, but still chasing for the path of democracy.
All right, last one over there. Yeah.
Sorry, I'll be.
So that's why you held on to the microphone.
Sorry, I'll be really quick because I feel like I really need to like share this. It's like a feedback which might be responding to all of what you guys just said, especially Xiangyu, and also the current pro-Trump phenomenon, because I think Xiangyu, he reminded me the podcast that emerged for the last 2 years, 叫法令部, 不知道有人听过吗? I personally feel horrified by that podcast, but I also have a lot of friends who support that podcast and got completely brainwashed. And he would travel from Taipei to Tainan to attend their meet and greet, where they review so-called international headlines, and they call themselves press. And basically, not a lot of them have journalism background, as far as I know. And I listened to their podcast, super inaccurate, and 就是很煽动, 就是 they're like comedians, but they call themselves press. And just because they review headlines and talk about chit-chat about news. And I think they are one of the main factors in instigating the pro-Trump phenomenon rhetoric, which also is very much a hit in Hong Kong, the pro-Trump rhetoric. And I think that how these things work is, I think it's very urgent and also dangerous. So I just wanted to note that, because I don't know, because I have friends who are really hardcore supporters of that podcast. And I think it's also crucial to note how these podcasts emerge. They kind of they call themselves BBC, and they brought in a trend from the US, because as far as I know, I also listen to the American podcast, and they try to replicate. 就是他们把自己说成自己是 Joe Rogan, and Joe Rogan is also a very trendy podcast, a very popular podcast in the US. But
the Joe Rogan podcast is more like a entertainment business. But he used his kind of style, and sometimes he quote, oh, that's what Joe Rogan currently said. And it just really bothers me. I just had to let it out. So it doesn't, I hope that also responds to all of you.
Sure. Yeah. Could you pass it back? Maybe this one works better. This is also, so yeah, you go ahead.
Okay. Well, so many questions. And because of the time, let me just combine and divide it into like 3 or 4 topics. One is about the regulation. Okay. Yes, as maybe if you are okay. We will see what NCTU will do in the future. Then we will know the answer, because they say they will use the same criteria to regulate other TV news channels, but we will see. If they don't, they just a kind of obvious bias. But the important thing is, because they spend a lot of effort in I think too much effort in the renewal of the license, cable TV license. As many other students said, that the cable TV is going down. It is not as important as it was in the 1990s or 2000. But I agree with the NCC that we should not approve the application of the CTI news, the renewal of their license, because actually they violate many things. But I think they should pay some more efforts in other things, in other aspects and of the whole media environment. And they should claim very clearly that they will do some other things rather than this. They gave us I think a very bad impression that this decision is very historical. It's very important because they are very brave to make this decision. They are brave, but they are not brave enough, or they are not capable enough to say that this is only a part of the whole governance of the media. So we will see, NCC. Second is about the new media and the fake news. And I think, yes, we have many kinds of new media platforms, and they are currently replaced the traditional media. But I think that we should see the origin of the problem of the media environment in Taiwan. What is that? And it will also influence every new kind of media. If we don't, like for example, like I said, I don't think we have already had a very strong and localized philosophy or principles of good media. What an ideal relationship between the media and the civil society and the state. We're still working on it we have already worked on it for like over 50 or 60 years. But we thought we have, but actually we don't. We're still on the process. So that's why I go back to, I trace back to the traditional media, the process of how they developed into today's situation. That is very important. If we see this all the digital digitalization or digital media, new media, as a new communication technology, in the 1980s, the cable television was also a new communication technology. We can see how the society and how the state and how people faced the new communication technology get into their life, get into this society. What they did and how they make governance decisions. So we can see take cable television as an example. The state didn't want to see it first because it will threat. They think it will threat their legitimacy. So they just sometimes they just give us very strong regulations. Sometimes they just forget because when they feel it is safe, they just reluctant to pay more attention to it. So this is what we can see in by now, because all the new media, the government just let it develop freely. But recently they try to get some new decisions in governing news, like they will try to give license to some internet websites or social media. That is, we will see that is very bad, and they will continue to make the same mistakes as they made in the 1980s and 1990s. What is the good governance measures should be? I will take some examples in Europe. In some European countries, they don't give license to digital media, but they just put some tax onto all these new emerging media, because, like you say, they largely they don't produce content by themselves. They just transfer. They just give platform. So they make money, big money. So you should pay tax to the government. And the government use this tax money to support local content producers, and we can have more good, better contents by the local companies. Otherwise, they will be in a very disadvantaged situation in compete with all these new medias, particularly the transnational new media. So from this example, we can see we may find some. I think it's better way to how we regulate or how we govern the new media. And the fake news is the same thing. So in addition to the question from the gentleman here about the Chuang and about the media education, I think media education is always the right answer. I think it is not the only right answer. That's important because we can do media education all the time. Particularly when we face fake news, we should teach young people, or not young, or older people, how to identify what is correct and what is fake. But the important thing is not only to educate, because in the case of CTI news, some scholars just say we should educate what real meaning of freedom of speech or freedom of press is. But I think education is not enough. You need to understand first. You need to understand people, why they have different definition of freedom of speech from you. Why they like to convey and transmit all the fake news all the day. Why they are doing this? They are not transfer, they are not communicate or broadcast fake news to their peers or their friends or families, because they of course they don't think that is fake. They think that is helpful. There is present to share all this information to their friends. That is very important. We need to understand why they need this. Why don't they use other ways to please their friends rather than by share all these memes, fake news, very sentimental contents, sensational contents. So may I have just a very short conclusion that I think that the important thing is to understand the history and the audience. And later we do the right education and right reform measures. Thank you.
Let me say a few words before we close. Okay. Actually, we have listened to this two scholars, researchers, teachers about their thoughts and views on what kind of society do we want, okay, what kind of media or communication mode that we think are appropriate. I think at the back, okay, both of them would agree that we would not want to be totally ruled or governed by an authoritarian or monolithic regime, right? Either by the party or by the several parties or by the capitalist regime. Okay. So at the back of it is what society or what political act do we want to engage. When we say political, that is all people in the polis, that is the city today, in the space, can express, can communicate equally with one another. So that is the publicness or the public reason, public space. But it doesn't mean that everyone can occupy the space freely, because they might privatize the space. They might use their own private objectives and desire or profit to maneuver and to dominate the space. Okay, so but now people, in addition to walking through the streets, they can use all different kinds of channels. In the past, the state will use newspaper and broadcasting radio, right, and teach us what we need to believe or think, right. But now we want to exercise our life to engage and have the equal access. But then, how do we regulate? I think one way is to think, to differentiate the publicness and there's a privatization. Privatization, for example, Murdoch, or this Zhongtian, okay, they became a media empire. They became a media capitalism, and also they have such strong influence on politics, on the government. Okay, so when we say who is consuming or who is producing the commodity, it is not only the market or the entrepreneurs or this oligarchy regime that they have all this capital, okay, but also in alliance with the state, the government, those people who have interest and also the power. So when we say, oh, these people, they have their taste, they have their very minor or micro enjoyment of this and that, but they are actually shaped also in that way. Right? They fully believe, they fully are convinced. So they before they make their reasoning or judgment, they have already reached the consensus that this version or that version is the one they like. Okay. So in that way, what shall we do? Because there might be civil war in terms of this media regimes and so on. So what can we do when we say when we see this inequality or this populist version or this very fascist nationalism is prevailing, what can we do? Okay, so we need to really think what has been privatized and what can still be the public space. So, but I think that there are several diverse ways to reach a solution through action, intellectual action, journalistic activism, artistic engagement, intervention, or education through different modes locally. Or to think how can we encourage more independent media like production and other things. Okay, let's stop here and we'll continue next week for different issues. Okay, I hope you can continue your own thinking and try to reach your own solution. All right? Okay. Let's thank this two teachers.